exclusively that a grand jury was hearing evidence against Tish James. We have now heard the news that New York Attorney General Leticia James has been indicted. Carol Leonnig.
Yeah, a few minutes ago we confirmed that she was indicted by a grand jury in Alexandria of at least one count of bank fraud, Nicole, and the return was rather speedy. 4 o'clock was when the grand jury was supposed to come back out and present their information to Halligan. There was a four-person in the courtroom along with Halligan, and they released their decision. I will tell you there's one other really interesting element to this that I'm hearing from sources, which is that this grand jury made its decision and listened to the presentation on its very first day in the box. In other words, grand juries sit sometimes for weeks and weeks. This grand jury was impaneled today, and this was their first case and their first decision.
Carol, any reaction from any of the resigned or fired U.S. attorneys in the Virginia offices that had looked at these cases and been pressured before Lindsay Halligan's appointment to bring them and refused?
Well, in the 10 minutes since I was last with you and the 10 minutes before we were reporting, I have not spoken with some of those folks, but I can tell you from previous conversations that they were bracing for this. Leticia James herself, I understand from sources, was fully expecting that she would be indicted. Again, keeping in mind that the standard for indicting someone is the probability that there may be a crime that was committed. And it's a very low standard, but she was expecting this and bracing for it herself. Prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia, some of them driven out by their decision not to bring this case, some of them resigning in disgust about other cases that Donald Trump is pressing and insisting upon. He wants to get to all the hits in his enemies list. Those people have been really tortured about all of this, because for them, not only is this not a righteous case, not only is this not a justified case, but for them, it does not even meet the bare minimum for the evidence that has to be presented at trial to sustain a conviction.
Carol, just talk a little bit about the legacy of this office. This is an office that, other than SDNY, I believe, brings the bulk of terrorism and national security cases. It has regardless of whether the person who's president is a Democratic politician or a Republican politician, this office is pretty storied. It is now forever tainted as the office that Trump's handpicked, underqualified prosecutors bring political prosecutions.
This office had a lot of respect among U.S. attorneys' offices in the country for exactly the reason that in the wake of 9/11, it became the home of very thorough, rigorous, and relentless terror prosecutions. It became the home of moving quickly and speedily, but also focusing on the toughest cases, the ones that protect national security, both from international terrorism, from domestic terrorism. It became this place often described as the rocket docket, because there was no flinching, no waiting. Prosecutors had a joke of, look, I go to the defense and I say, we're going to indict you on Monday if you don't come in and plead. And Friday passes and they indict on Monday. It had a very unflinching quality about it. But it is part of the behemoth of the Department of Justice. And I think it's so important that you focus on this, Nicole, the legacy. The Department of Justice's manual for prosecutors, its advice to them is, do not bring a case out of pettiness. Do not bring a case out of political or partisan goals. Do not bring a case because you feel some animus to this individual. Bring a case after you rigorously assess the facts, are sure that they are solid and true, and believe that this is in the public interest to bring this case. There is a joke now going around in Washington, D.C., that if Leticia James can be charged with bank fraud, pretty much anybody could because we fill out financial forms all the time where someone checks the wrong box. We don't know all the facts in Leticia James's case, but the ones we have in front of us, certainly, and the ones that prosecutors in this office assessed multiple times, did not seem like a very strong or righteous case.
Well, and Carol, to your point, we don't have all the facts, but Trump's own appointees inside the Department of Justice did. And until Lindsay Halligan got there, Trump's own political appointees to these offices didn't believe there was a case against Leticia James.
That's right. And my understanding is that Attorney General Bondi and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, while certainly very fierce supporters of the president, privately had concerns about this case, privately understood where Eric Siebert was coming from and wanted to try to keep that U.S. attorney in place and understood his reservations.
Director Brennan, let me bring you in on this, and let me try to sort of honor Mark Elias's note about anchoring the news in the moment in which we are, not in the moment we remember being. You're on this list. Is your life different knowing that without any facts, with Trump being there an entire first term, raging against you and carrying out the revenge he could? I think he took your security clearances away by 2017 or 18, that this isn't a moment where our country is led by a party in the White House, at the Department of Justice, or in Congress, or in the media, which is, I think, where Andrew's note about tit for tat being out there, and I appreciate nipping disinformation in the bud as much as anyone, but there isn't a two sides frame that you can put this story in. MAGA Republicans refuse to indict Jim Comey. MAGA Republicans refuse to indict Tish James. Today, Jim Comey has been arraigned, and 40 minutes ago, Tish James was indicted. Where are we?
Well, Nicole, I think this is just one feature that we have seen over the last 9 months in terms of the collapse of the America that we knew. When I look at the footage of ICE raids throughout the country, the deployment of U.S. military, the actions against law firms, universities, other types of organizations that Donald Trump doesn't like, and then going after his critics. I agree with Mark when he said that Donald Trump probably doesn't care. He probably would like people to get convicted, but he knows he can't control that. What he would like, though, is to have the word indicted next to individuals' names. And he knows that he has a Department of Justice that he can exploit and manipulate, and he has an Attorney General who's willing to do the bidding. I'm old enough to remember the days of Watergate, when we had an Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, and a deputy, Bill Ruckelshaus, who resigned rather than do what President Nixon wanted to do. We are not in that era anymore. We don't have individuals who are willing to stand up to what clearly is an autocratic, authoritarian effort on the part of the Trump administration. Not just Trump, it's the Stephen Millers and others who are very mean-spirited, very, vengeful, very, very nasty in many respects, trying to hurt and damage people across the board, whether or not you're an undocumented individual who's been here for 30 years and has, raised a family and has a job, or you're a former national security professional who's worked over 3 decades to try to keep this country safe. If you're not on the Trump team, then you are potentially a target. And I think, as Carol mentioned, the way that they're going out now and trolling and looking for ways to be able to indict people or bring charges against people really is something that should worry every American. And the fact that the Republicans in Congress are allowing this to happen, that I find is the most appalling part. Until they grow some, in Congress and really say enough is enough, I think we're going to continue to see these abuses of power, which is what it is.
When I